Welcome to Pillar Talk with Rochelle, where authentic people share real stories focusing on one of the 12 pillars in my book, Simply Complex, Leading Out of Authenticity. I am your host, Rochelle Armstrong, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Hello and happy holidays. Thank you for tuning in to the season finale of Pillar Talk for season 2. In season 2, we've had the honor and the privilege of hearing 11 amazing interviews. That's right, we've had 11 people come on and discuss one of the 11 pillars in my book, Simply Complex, Leading Out of Authenticity. So today, we get the opportunity to hear from one of my favorite humans in the whole wide world, my husband, my best friend, my pastor, and just someone that I can really lean and depend on. And I just want to thank him for being on the podcast today and going over the 12th pillar, which is personality. So Jamel, you want to say hello to our audience?
Well, hello, Pillar Talk family. I've watched you from behind the scenes, and so now I'm blessed and privileged to be in front now, which is a pretty cool opportunity.
Yeah, and it's interesting because each season, so it's only been two seasons. He's been helping with the production and totally supportive of the podcast, but I've never asked him to be a guest. And so when I was thinking about personality and just different people who maybe could do that pillar, immediately Jamel came to mind for two reasons. One is the misconception that people have of his personality type. And two, when I think about our personalities and how polar opposite they are, I thought this would be a great opportunity to close out the season going in depth about personality. But what you will get today is not just an interview, but with us being a couple, we have the opportunity to kind of share the differences in our personality, how that can be beneficial, but how it can also be challenging at times. And so I'm hoping if you're tuned in, get you something to drink. I always have me a little H2O. Relax if you're outside taking a walk. Just allow yourself to completely immerse in the experience. And hopefully you will gain some type of inspiration or hope or strength or entertainment, if nothing else, from today's episode. And so that's just a little context. I'm not going to really get into the origin story of how Jamel and I met. If you're interested, it is in the book, Simply Complex, Leading Out of Authenticity. And you can kind of get more information about our origin story. But in the interest of time, I'm going to have Jamel tell you a little bit about himself.
All right. Well, as my beautiful wife said, my name is Jamel Armstrong. I am a husband, of course, father of Jonathan, Jessica, Deja, now grandfather of Landon. I am a pastor. And also I'm bivocational. I also am work for a small nonprofit rather, and I am a community organizer. And so all of those are joys of mine. There's the old saying that if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. God has blessed me that I'm never running from any area of my life. I know people who work a lot to escape home. I know people who try to, take advantage of their work experience because they're trying to escape it. I don't have to escape any of it. I'm blessed to enjoy what I do in all aspects. And so I love my family, love my wife, my kids. I love the work that I do. So I'm a blessed man. I can't find a reason to complain about it.
Oh, how sweet. I didn't pay him anything to say that, by the way, but
should pay me later.
So with that being said, what I'm going to do is ask you to tell us a little more about your personality. Just kind of describe your temperament.
All right. So simply put, I say that I'm fairly cool, calm, and collected. I think that is something that anybody who knows me, you kind of grab from me. I'm incredibly introspective. I spend so much of my time in my head that yeah, I can have a number of conversations going on at one time because I'm just always thinking things through and working on things in my mind. I am probably, no, not probably, definitely someone who is, very analytical, and so I'm always thinking. That could be to a fault because um, there are times when I'm making an analysis when perhaps I need to be in the moment, which can then lead to me being somewhat socially awkward at times. And so I'm very aware of that. Sometimes I'll even say like, wow, I probably could have did a little bit better there, and so aware of it. But for the most part, I pride myself on being laid back. I am someone whom you can find to always, for the most part, um, be together. I'm put together. I'm rarely, very rarely outside of myself, and that has become somewhat of a learned behavior over time. So.
No, and nicely stated. And I'm listening to you, and I heard certain characteristics of your dominant personality type. So, what I'll tell our audience, if you haven't had an opportunity to read the book or you don't really get into personality types or assessments, most researchers or psychologists believe that there are four different types of personalities or temperaments. And Myers and Briggs believe there are 16 personality types. And so ideally, you would have probably all of those personality types in you, but some are more prevalent than others. So like he talked about being analytical. So when I was listening to him, I know that has to do with one of his personality types, the more dominant one, but there's also characteristics with another personality type that is very prevalent for Jamel that I haven't heard yet. And so what I'm going to do, if you understand the language that I'm speaking, you told me about the more analytical side of you, the more left side brain side of you, but I know as your wife, you have this other side that is also dominant, which typically is very confident. It has elements of, I hate to use the word, well, it's enthusiastic. It's witty. It's competitive, so I don't want to put words into your mouth, but can you speak a little more to that side of your personality?
Yeah, so I think meeting me initially, you would think that what I described first is the totality of who I am, but I'm also very hyper. I am very impulsive. You said witty. I joke and I play a whole lot. I've been told that I play too much, and so that's a big part of who I am. Confidence, yes. I and this, it can be beneficial, and it can also be it can be a little challenging for those that I'm around, and I think that I passed off a portion of this to our youngest. That confidence, I lack very little of it. I guess a way to put it. I probably teeter on the edges of arrogance at times, and it is not something, when we hear that, we think that it is like a choice. Oftentimes, that people have that. I don't choose to be that way. I just really believe in myself. I've said that, when my mother told me as a kid that I could be whatever I wanted to be, I never stopped believing it. The problem with that is that you mix that confidence, that belief, along with impulsiveness. It can sometimes create a bit of a chaotic experience for those that I'm around. My wife has had to deal with that for 20 years, especially earlier in our marriage, where I was exploring a little bit of everything. And you could have told me, whether it was wedding photography, I'm a good photographer. photographer. I can, I'm an entrepreneur. Oh, I'm a good skating rink owner. Like I'm a good everything. And I've yet to figure out something that I'm like, you know what? I don't think I'd be good at that. Like in my mind, I'm always like, I'd be great at that,
Right.
And so that's very much so a part of my personality as well, which it helps me because and what God has called me to, it requires me to oftentimes step out into environments where I don't have many other people around to glean from, and so one of the first assessments you had me take years back, the Strengths Finder, talked about that I was self-assured.
Mhm.
And I remember you telling me about like, yeah, that's why you can do these things, because you don't need nobody to tell you that you're good enough. You believe it in yourself. And so yeah, that's a part of me. In my younger years, I led more with that part of myself. I think growing and maturing, I recognized that portion of myself wasn't necessarily a good leader. And I think in my heart, what I always want to be is a good leader, and that's in all aspects. So I'm not just talking about professionally. I think that in order to be a good husband, to be a good father, requires certain leadership qualities that I wanted to make sure that I presented well. And then, of course, in my professional life as well, I couldn't be impulsive, led, and driven by my hyperactivity and impulsiveness. Those things aren't qualities that make for a good partner in a marriage, for a good parent, definitely not. And then I saw loopholes in leadership professionally that made me figure out, okay, I have to figure out how to mature a little bit. And my maturing, I leaned in more to the other part that I started off with.
Well, nicely stated. I appreciate you going in such depth about your personality. And one of the things that you said was it's innate.
Yeah.
It's like, so what you have to understand is some of the characteristics or attributes about people that you absolutely love or absolutely hate. It may be out of their control.
Mm-hmm.
Like you think that this person is just trying to be annoying or they're trying to frustrate you. And that's how come I wanted Jamel and I to speak on this together as a couple today, is because like he just explained both of his personality types, the more prevalent ones, polar opposite of mine. That can be a beautiful thing in the sense that we challenge one another and we bring the best out of each other. But you best believe we frustrate each other because there is something within all of us and how we're wired up, consciously or not. We expect people to be like we are. We expect people to do things how we would do them. And when those two start to compete, for lack of a better word, it can either be harmful and in some ways may be helpful if you learn something out of it. So what I'm going to ask, as you're listening today, is to seek understanding. So as we're going over our personality types and we're sharing, I want you to put yourself in our shoes and I want you to think about your hard wiring. So again, there's certain things about your personality that I think Jamel can touch on. You can try to change, but then sometimes subconsciously, it's still going to kind of come out of you. And so what I want you to speak on now are some misconceptions about your personality type.
Yeah, well, because I am incredibly introspective and analytical, so I'm always in my head thinking things through, which at times it hinders how I engage the world around me and people, especially in my profession, being a pastor. The assumption is that I lack compassion. We've heard a number of things over the years that people think that I'm kind of cold and all that because I don't respond the way that people think that I should respond initially. And so the misconception is that I don't feel. So I've been given nicknames, icebox, refrigerator, things like that. And I guess as I was maturing and learning a little bit more about myself, I kind of leaned into that perhaps a little bit too much. and just thinking, okay, well, I'm going to have to make sure that whether it is you as my wife, who is someone that people get that from on a greater level, that perhaps, you could be my proxy in those spaces. Professionally, I have to make sure that there's somebody on my team who is known as a more compassionate person, so that I'm not forced to be something that I'm not. Going back to one of the things that we learned early on with the Strengths Finder, it talks about that you cannot be anything that you
That's
want to
right.
be.
That's right.
And so I'm thinking, and then there's another pastor that I admire, and he talked about, that we ought not exert a lot of energy trying to be good at something that we're inherently not good at. I leaned into that, but I read that wrong. That compassion, kindness, things like that, number one, aren't some things that we aren't quote unquote good at or not. It's actually a part of our humanity.
Absolutely.
And so I think, because I didn't quite understand how I was hardwired and how I was really created, I leaned into something that perhaps I shouldn't have. Maturing a little bit later, I figured out, well, it's not that I lacked those things. It's just that they don't show the way, so I'm not going to shed tears with you. But what I will do is I will stay with you. I will listen to you. I will counsel you. And I'm the person that you can lay out your whole life story, and I won't get annoyed by it. I won't cut you off. Like I'll sit and be with you in the midst of things. And so it just shows differently. And so what I've tried to do now is, rather than allowing that to be the narrative, because what happened is I believe that people began to form, at least in their heads, this caricature of who I was. And after a period of time, I was like, wait a minute, like that hurts my feelings. Like, no, I actually do care. Like, I actually do feel that, like, just because I may sit in it differently than someone else does, doesn't mean that I don't feel.
Yeah, and I like that you use the compassion example, because what I know about part of your personality type is you have feelings, but you don't necessarily speak feelings. Yeah. You don't speak in feelings. And so that's one of our core differences as well. Is one of my prevalent personality types is very introspective also. It's also very intuitive. Yeah. And because I feel things deeply, a lot of times you're going to also get an expression of how I'm feeling outwardly, whether if it's in words, if it's in language. Like, I'm very intentional about how I want you to feel, because I feel deeply. And so, when you talk about not really, that you're compassionate, but people will have this misconception of you, or even joke about you not being compassionate or being like an icebox. Do you think that people start to become what people call them, even if they don't necessarily believe that's them, because that's kind of been put on them?
Yeah, and I think that's what I mentioned earlier, is that I started out really leaning into that until I started listening to more and more people say that that's who I was. And I was like, nah, that's not me. Right. And I'm like, wait a minute. Oftentimes when someone would say something like that, I joke. And I think everybody else is joking. And I'm like, oh, wait a minute. You all think this is the totality of who I am. And there's more to me than that. And so I'm sure, just speaking for myself, at a moment I did, but I recognized that it wasn't healthy. So I made sure to start doing some work to even help to kind of redirect the narrative about that, that I didn't want people. So when people say, oh, I'm like, no, that's not me. Like, I actually do care. I actually do feel like, to make sure to correct people on it, because I didn't want people who didn't know me, that I have to engage or minister to think, okay, like, oh man, it's just a little cold-hearted pastor. Like, what worst thing in the world to have is a pastor that don't care. And so So I didn't want that to be a prevailing narrative about me. So I started to work to kind of dismantle some of that.
And I appreciate you saying that. And because I wanted you to go a little deeper and share further context about it, because I'm sure if you're going through that, there's other people that's going through the same thing as well. And so as we talk about what other people say about us and how that may influence us and how we see ourselves and how we even start acting out, how powerful is it for us to speak out positive things about us when we're talking about self? Because, as I was listening to you, something you said is you used to laugh or make jokes about it, but then eventually you had to say, no, that's not who I am. And so what about the people that have like negative self-talk, but outwardly, not just what they think, they share with people, yeah, I'm not very smart, or, oh my God, I'm stupid, or, they say it in a way as if it's jokingly, but we know there's power in the tongue. So how important, I guess is probably the better question, how important is it for people to speak positively around people, despite if other people think they're arrogant or not?
Yeah, I think that it's incredibly important because more than anything, you need to be certain, you need to be consistent, and you need to be I'm trying to think of the term to really capture what I'm thinking about here. But who you believe that you are in your heart and who you desire to be, you need to control that.
You need to control it because, we know the term fake humility.
Yeah.
And I'm asking selfishly. So if you typically listen to the podcast, I ask a lot of questions for me personally, but also questions that I think our listeners might have. And so I know for many years, and this as my husband, I would just kind of play myself down or shrink to make other people feel better about themselves, because whatever environments that I was in, if the people in that environment had this attitude, not necessarily that they were better than me, but maybe they weren't as self-confident or they weren't as secure, whether if they said it verbally or their energy or how, whatever the case may be. And I know most of you can relate to what I'm saying. I would feel the need to kind of shrink back or say something negative about myself to make sure that either I fit in or that other people felt good about themselves. But as you know,
it's not helpful. It's not
helpful,
beneficial.
Right.
It's not going to give them what they want or what they desire, because ultimately it's something on the inside of them. But I know, being someone who struggles with arrogance or can be overly confident, is if there are people who feel a certain kind of way because of how I present myself. I'm one who, it doesn't matter. It could be Barack Obama sitting in front of me. If we're at the table, I think I'm the most important person at the table. I'm naturally hardwired that way. I believe everybody ought to be that way as well, though. Now, within that, my humility is rooted in my belief in my Christ-likeness. And so there's a difference between playing yourself down, lowering yourself, and being Christ-like humble. Playing yourself down in front of people isn't necessarily an idea of humility. It is actually probably more rooted in people pleasing than it is in actually being humble. Especially being humble before God. I don't believe that God put us on the planet for us to lower ourselves, for us to think lesser of ourselves in front of humanity. No, I think that in order to be beneficial to the world, you got to be the best version of yourself that you can be. And so you have to think well about yourself, speak well about yourself, even if you struggle with that. And over the years, I think when you talk about the me, and how I used to the dominant part of me that used to come out. I want to, almost be arguing with you, like, forget them. I need you to present yourself like this. And, I almost cuss and just let them know, this is how I want you to present yourself, and, screw the rest of everybody else. And, but, we're wired up differently in that, because I'd be ready to fight them and to show them how much smarter than I am than everybody, which is, a tendency of mine in spaces like that. But even, you talk about it in the chapter in your book that has, that's a part of what you've experienced, is being in those spaces where, and of course, me having a little bit more inside knowledge on those experiences over time, is it wasn't you in those spaces, it was them. They thought less of themselves. They were insecure. And because you show up well, and here's the problem, you show up well, you're a professional, you do things well and all that. What they had a problem with was the fact that when they compared themselves to you, is that they didn't measure up. And so since they didn't measure up, I got to figure out, since I can't produce, I got to play you down. And I think just in that, want to be in a cohesive or just a very, kind of keep everything peaceful environment, you would play yourself down in hopes that it would make them feel better about themselves. They're not going to feel better about themselves, because the only thing that they could do in order to make themselves feel better is produce the way that you produce. But people aren't going to work as hard as you do, and they're not going to put in the time and and all those efforts and stuff. So it takes a certain amount of effort and work, and this is something, again, learning over time, that it takes a certain amount of learning and effort and time and perseverance and stick-to-itiveness, that when you show up into the world, you are able to produce on levels that maybe many people can't. And in doing so, you find people who aren't willing to put in the work, the time, the effort, the stick-to-itiveness to do so. And so since they're not willing to put in the time, they'd rather tear you down than go back to the drawing board to put in the work. So since I won't work, I'll tear you down.
Wow. So again, this is my husband, my support, like he has my back, and he's been saying this for years. And one of the words, or I guess two words, if you want to be correct, you said people pleasing. So one of the things that I want to touch on in terms of my personality type is he said, I'm harmonious. I don't necessarily avoid conflict or confrontation, but I like cohesive, harmonious environments. Because I'm not okay. When you think about the technical term of an empath, I'm not necessarily an empath, but pretty close to it. Simply stated, I feel deeply. So what that means, if when I'm in any environment or around people, if you have good energy, if you're healthy, especially emotionally, spiritually, I pick up on that. I feel it. If you're negative, if you're angry, I feel emotions deeply. And so I guess maybe it's a coping mechanism or a survival tool, if you will, is to survive in those environments when I would feel that negative energy, or like I didn't fit in, or it wasn't harmonious. What I would do is I would shift or adjust to fit into that environment. And so what he's telling me, and what we're saying to you, is you don't have to do that, because in your Christ-like, you are created in the image of God. Everything about you is not necessarily perfect, because you are imperfect. And we know that he was human and divine, but in your Christ likeness, you should think highly of yourself. You should have confidence in what it is that he has gifted you with, but your humility comes from knowing it is not of you. It is of him. And so I just thank you for really breaking that down. But I want to know, have you always been this confident? Have you always, walked into the room and felt like you fit in? And, so tell us a little more about kind of where you come from. What was your personality type growing up? And did you have to make adjustments over the years?
Yeah, so no, it wasn't that way. In my in my youth, I was not. I was probably the person that was oftentimes looked over. I was always academically at the top of my class, all through school. Um, but as far as socially, even with teachers, I was a good student, but I mean, they pretty much ignored me for most of my time in school. Um, in my social circles, I was, I wasn't very popular. I would say, for most of my younger years, it wasn't until about eighth grade because I was hyper and all that. So I was a kid to get on your nerves too. I could do all my work and I'd score good grades and all that, but I was a little hyper. And so I was always, sit down, be quiet, stop talking, you get on my nerves. I heard that from everybody, family members, from you just name it. I was the guy that, you see you coming, people roll their eyes. About eighth grade, I started playing sports. And it turned out that I was as equally as good of an athlete as I was a student. And so I show up, football, I started playing football. Football starts in the summertime, and then you go to school, you've been playing, show up eighth grade year, and all of a sudden, people who didn't speak to me, now they speak to me because I'm clearly talented and they like athletes. And so I love that attention.
Mhm.
So I began to get some popularity and went to high school. Before I even set foot in my high school's doors, they were waiting for me. People were talking about me. And
Mhm.
so it was like, okay, like I like this popularity thing. And unfortunately, I leaned into that a little bit too much, which made my academic life suffer. But something happened my sophomore year into my junior. No, it was just my sophomore year, maybe my freshman year. Yeah, freshman year going into my sophomore year, second semester of my freshman year. But I won't say the school, local high school here in Louisville. You heard me talking about this with a friend the other day, or with my sister. They put us in the basement,
Mhm.
and it was me and a bunch of guys from my neighborhood, and so we were there. We didn't have to do schoolwork. Basically, we sat down there, we talked, we gambled, rolled dice, played cards for money. I mean, we just hung out. You went to lunch, you went to gym, and that was your day. As long as you
Mhm.
go to practice and stuff, I still had straight A's. I just had to show up and be in that room all day. By the end of that semester, I recognized that there was really nothing that I could do wrong. They wanted me to produce for them. So me and a good buddy of mine, we just said, hey, we'll go if we feel like it. And
Mhm.
we roamed the halls all day. And teachers and administrators see us in the hallways, they just waved. And they just wanted us to show up and make sure we was on the field or on the track. We were really good in track as well. And so that's what they expected from us. My sophomore year, football season, things were going well. Same thing was going. I was in a program that was called the Louisville Partnership Program. And I remember going to a meeting, and I remember looking at a document that was on the lady who led the counselor who led the group, and it was for at-risk students, and they had at-risk in quotation marks. And I remember feeling some kind of way about it, but I also remember how she treated me. We had a football game where we played against a school here, and at least three of the guys on that team wound up going to the NFL. The quarterback was one of them, and he was nationally talked about. And so the thing was, what she offered, this lady of the program, she offered us $20 to anybody that would sack him, which tackle the quarterback when he's trying to pass the ball. Um, I sacked him. Not only did I sack him, but I made him fumble and I recovered the fumble, which is a really big deal.
Okay.
Now they beat us 62-14, so it wasn't that great. They were just an amazing team during those days, and I remember in the cafeteria going up to her, and one guy who had sacked him, she gave him $20, and I was like, "Hey, I sacked and got the fumble." And she says, "Well, did nobody tell me?" I'm thinking, well, he didn't tell you. You were at the game, you saw it, and it was one of those moments where I was like, okay, I'm overlooked, yet still. And it just brought back some of the feelings that I had from my younger years, like, okay, I'm still overlooked. Like, what's the problem? Things happen in personal life, and wound up having to transfer schools, and I go to another school, and I get there, and my aunt registers me for school, and the second day that I'm there, counselor, I'll never forget. I'm grateful for her, Ruth Gerald. She calls me down to her office, and she asked me, "What have you been doing?" And I'm thinking, wait a minute, it's the second day of school. I haven't done anything. I've only been here 2 days. I don't even know anybody to get in trouble yet. And I'm like, I've been doing nothing. She says, "No, what have you been doing for the last year and a half in school?" And I'm like, "What do you mean?" She says, "Well, when I look at your records and what you've been doing over there, um, that there's some type of disconnect, because your scores say that you should be in the advanced program, but you've not been in advanced classes. Tell me what's been going on in school the last year and a half." So I told her that, what they did with us, about being in the partnership program. It turns out I should have been in advanced classes. I think she told me since eighth grade. And what she told me, and this was a white lady, she says, they only put you in that program, the Louisville Partnership Program, and they only um, treated you like that was because you're Black and where you're from.
Wow.
Growing up in the Russell neighborhood and being a young Black boy, that they did not care about my education. So she changed my entire schedule, and she says, "I expect you to produce on the level in which you are capable of doing while you're here in this school." And everybody in that school challenged me to make sure that I would be the best version and the best student that I could be there. And I appreciate them.
What's her name? What's the counselor's name?
Her name was Ruth Gerald. Ruth Gerald. Everybody else thought she was mean. She wasn't the nicest lady, but she believed in me. Matter of fact, when I went away to college, I came back, and myself and my good friend Will, we started a program there, with it was one of my first youth outreaches. We started the program back at the school, and to reach kids like us who came from similar backgrounds. And she was our biggest cheerleader. She made sure that we had all the resources that we want in order to reach out to the kids at school there. And so within that, what I was working towards is, there were some significant people during that season who really saw me, and it made a difference. And so she was part of the starting ones that was there. There was Mr. Calvin White, Reverend Calvin White, turns out, who was a pastor. You remember him?
I remember Mr. White.
Man, and so he passed away. He was a wonderful mentor. Miss now Calvin Spalding, who was Calvin Curry at the time, who was over the Louisville Partnership Program. She never treated me like I was in that program. She treated me according to what she saw in me. And so they challenged me to be a leader. And the expectation was I was not allowed to act like everybody else. So they saw potential in me, and they made me be that way. I had to be the leader that they saw. I love that. And so I credit so much of who I've become, and that the confidence from just that couple 2 or 3 year period where they saw me, and then the older that I got, I just began to believe more and more and more and more in it, because the more that I did, the better that I got in other areas of life.
Right. Of course, I've heard parts of this story, but as you were talking, I was also deeply saddened because you said up until the 8th grade, you had that experience. It wasn't until the 8th grade that Ruth Gerald kind of stepped in.
It was 10th grade.
With 10th grade. So took even longer. The significance of that, when Daniel Melson was on here, we got an opportunity to talk about the school system, and everyone does not have the same experience. No two experiences are the same. So I'm going to say this. The man I know today, Jamel, is one of the smartest people I know. So when I say I was deeply saddened as I was listening to his story, that he was put in the basement, there was no expectations, and he was overlooked, or if not ignored. I'm thinking, are you serious? Because when he talked about him making good grades and being a good athlete, Deja immediately comes to mind. And so as I think about our temperaments and how she's wired up, I always attribute kind of like her intellect and her athleticism from you, and her hard work, her determination, and some of the other ways that she sees the world for me. But interestingly enough, and I think I shared this during Daniel's interview as well, although I can't say I went to all low performance schools, because I didn't. The more accurate term would be I went to neighborhood schools. So the schools that I went to, because I was poor and lived in underdevelopment areas, they were in poor neighborhoods. But this is what I'll say. In my family, at school, despite me just saying I attribute Deja's intellect and IQ to her dad, for whatever reason, my family, my teachers, my counselors, they always saw something in me. They always saw something in me that would push me. And so for that reason, I think maybe I turned out a little different than maybe some of my peers who I respect, and we all kind of had it hard and had to come up hard, and maybe their life turned out a little differently. So I think one of the reasons I'm so passionate about working with people who are at risk is because I was like you. I was also that person who was at risk. And unfortunately, some people didn't make it. And for those of us, who did, for lack of a better word, I don't really know what is making it, because we're always becoming, right? But we at least made it out of those environments to try to better ourselves. I want to fight for those who get left behind, or that they don't have a Ruth Gerald or Miss Calvin. Is it Calvin? I always say her name incorrectly, but Miss Calvin or Mr. White, or just different ones. I want to be that for them. And so, when you think about growing up, and you said that change happened for you in the 10th grade, and you said from that point on, you had the confidence, you saw yourself differently. Do you believe those things that they brought out of you was always in you, or were they developed, or a combination of both?
I think it was a combination of both. I'd say that in the years being overlooked, I didn't like it because I knew that I had more to offer. And I'll say this, that even by the time we got together, and I pushed back a whole lot more on it then. But in our then, which is how things works out, where we currently lead. One of the things that led me to feel like we needed to leave there years ago was because I felt overlooked. That I had something to offer, that I had a calling, and there was a certain look, a certain voice, a certain sound, I'd say, that was elevated there. And we didn't fit that. No, we didn't fit that at all. And I remember asking for things, and there were some things that I could do that many of the people there couldn't. I could actually have an idea. I could write it out and I could present it and be like, hey, this would be a good idea. Here's the reasons why. Here's what we can do with it. Here's what, and I would lay something out and I would present it. And I'm like, hey, this will work. And then it wouldn't happen. Well, we thought such and such would be better to do this. And I remember being so offended on a number of occasions by it. Like, why wasn't I good enough?
Right.
And so I pushed back on it. But I remember thinking like, okay, God, I believe in this calling. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put myself in the best position to make sure, number one, that I'm getting better. But what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to allow anybody to stop me from doing that.
I know that's right.
Yeah, and so that was part of the reason why, during that season, we've talked about it before, why there was this turmoil, because I'm like, I can't sit here and be stagnant. Like I refuse to, not with this, because I believe too much of this. So I'm not going to allow this to limit. We got to launch out and go figure out something else.
Well, yeah, when you have something in you and you know that there's greater in you, I use the term greater a lot, just in the sense that whether if it's talent, whether it's skills, you feel it. And when you feel like, and I'm hearing this theme, overlooked, and some people might even say devalued. It's one of those things, if you stay in those environments too long, you will just succumb to that. So if there are no expectations of you, and that's why I say I'm grateful for people who had expectations in me. And I asked the question, do you think those characteristics were in you? They were developed or a mixture of both? It's because I don't think I believed it. So naturally, I didn't see what they saw. Yeah. But because there was a constant reiteration of, I see this in you. I could call out names right now of either teachers or companies that I work for. And I promise, no matter what environment I was in, somebody always saw something in me, and they would in some type of way promote me. Or if I remember, and I guess I won't say the name, I try to protect, you just don't want to ever have conflict. So you protect people's names, companies, whatever. But I was young, and I remember I was in college and I was working at this company, a little small company, and we started out on the phones and we were just calling people, asking them to get out and vote. That was it. Little cubicles, you didn't have an assigned cubicles. Just after I get out of my classes, I would go work this job. Well, interestingly enough, there was a lady who worked there, and she actually took me off of the phones from calling people to make me a receptionist. Now, that may seem insignificant to you, depending on where you're at in your career right now, but for this teenage girl, for her to, I'm like, what was I saying for her to make me a receptionist? Now, here's the thing, back then, a receptionist was kind of a big thing. I didn't even know how to use a fax machine. Yes, we did actually have fax machines, and I had to do correspondence and different things, but she believed in me that I could learn it, And so I just know that for people like me who don't have that natural confidence or just automatically believe in themselves, I do think it's important that we encourage one another and we try to bring the best out of each other, because sometimes you don't see the greatness or the greater in you, but it's there.
It's there. And I think there's another part of it too. And I think I probably kind of fell into this quote unquote trap. And that is, I recognize the tendency to be overlooked, so I'll make sure that I won't be. So I'll perform.
Okay, talk about it.
Yeah, I'll make sure that when I get into space, I'll talk so that you'll know that I'm the smartest. So don't put me in the classroom. I'm gonna dominate.
Okay.
Put me in a space. I'm going to make sure that I'm heard, that I'm seen. And so I would do that. Once we launched out and I got to space, I'm like, look, I can't do it anymore. And so we showed up at another church and I made sure that they knew who I was.
I love it.
Just got through there. And so I would perform. And then over time, I even saw the immaturity there, that it wasn't, out of the most noble means that I was doing so. I just wanted to be seen.
Okay.
And I didn't want to be devalued or overlooked. And so I made sure that I performed well enough so that I could be seen. And that even became a part of me where I was like, we talked about this before, how even in that, I wasn't able to be the best version of myself. because I was leading with the performative side of myself as opposed to my more introspective thinking side, which means that I wasn't producing well. And so started seeing that, but then I wasn't necessarily proud of it as well. Because what I was doing is I was just trying to be seen naturally. Now I don't mind it, I always say, regardless of what people may think about me, there's some things about me that you don't have to worry about. You talk about people and their temptations. I am not tempted by women. I'm not tempted by money. I'm tempted by pride.
Okay.
I like pride. I like the stage. I like to be seen. So I began leaning into that. Now that's my performing side, being an athlete. I like to be cheered for, and I like to be celebrated in that aspect, not like just kind of up close and personal, like from afar with crowds at a distance. So I was leaning into that because what I saw was, okay, when I was overlooked at a point in time, here's how I was seen. I performed well.
You performed well.
So I performed well to get the attention that was needed so that I could oftentimes get my way indoors where I need to be. So what that means is that I have this ability because of the way that I'm hardwired. I can listen to you speak for 5 minutes, and more than likely I can take a deep dive into whatever subject matter you're talking about, and I can perform well enough to work my way into whatever space that I want to be in.
Look at that.
Get me at tables, get me, in meetings, get me in the interviews, and I'll catch one thing and I'm like, oh, okay, I see it. I'm about to work my way in this door. And so that means that if I ever sit down in an interview, when I sat down in churches, when I wanted to get into places, I knew how to perform well enough in order to get me there. So I began to lean into that. And but then I would get in the door and figure out, wait a minute, I'm not prepared for this.
Okay.
I got myself here. Now I don't know what to do. And so I started to figure out that, okay, I want to be at spaces like this, but I also want to make sure, not just out of some noble reasons that everybody belongs. Now I want to belong here because I produce.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes. And I like that you said that. And, as you were speaking, I was thinking about our differences and how, for me, I feel like I'm a natural producer. So again, like I'm a hard worker, I'm determined. So for a long time, I was kind of that person that had the attitude, you can pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And me kind of being judgmental, and this is something that I had to work on to work out of me, is I felt like if I had to work hard to achieve certain things to make it, I felt like, why can't everybody just do that? And that's where my fascination came from with understanding people and personality types and temperaments. Is I feel like I was placing unrealistic expectations on people, and I was judging people for things that were maybe out of their control. And so as I think about our differences and how I'm not naturally wired up like you, you're not naturally wired up like me, we don't have the same temptations, we don't have the same struggles. And so it's kind of unfair when we judge people, because essentially what we're saying is they should be more like me. And so I guess one of the last things, I want to ask, kind of talk about us for a moment. And that's one of the things I touched on in the beginning of the interview. So with you being married to someone who is your polar opposite, who tend to, I'm definitely going to talk feelings. I'm going to talk emotions. I'm very comfortable in that space. How have you learned to manage some of the more challenging parts of my personality that conflicts with yours? What is that dichotomy like for you?
So I'm a big believer that love never asks the object to do. Love always does for the object. That is theological. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only son. So love never says, okay, this is what I need you to do because I love you, because you love me. Love always says, okay, man, this is what I have to do. Yes, there are still challenges that we experience, being polar opposites. But anytime you got two people in the same space, differences are just there. But because I love you, I'm just always trying to work on myself. And I know that there are things about me. It would be so easy for me to look at you and be like, man, listen, if you just wouldn't be in your emotions so much, or if you just wouldn't do this, but you're created that way.
Yeah.
So as someone who has spent years studying how we were created, it's almost asinine for me to be like, well, don't be you. Well, number one, I married you because you're you, so I want you to be you. Number two, it's also when you're in a relationship with someone, you do the work for that person rather than asking that person to do the work for you. So there are challenges. Probably what I'm most hard on myself, or the toughest times, is when I feel like I don't measure up to what I know that I could do a little bit better at, as opposed to being like, man, she just get out of her feelings, like everything will be okay.
Right.
Like, no, I never think about that. And then also the optimist in me, I never enter the world thinking about the challenges.
Okay.
Like, I never really spend time thinking about, ooh, that's going to be hard. Remember at the beginning, I said I'm confident. And so because of that, my blind spots are tremendous. Like, I never see the challenges on things. So relationally, that's beneficial, because I don't spend time thinking about, I just wish she wouldn't be. I just wish, I don't think about that. I just think about, okay, like, well, what I got to do to get better? How can I figure this out? And so that's just for me. Now, what I'll say is that everything takes work. Because many people aren't wired up as I am temperamentally, that it would be a little bit more difficult. What I'll say is that there's some things that we've just done to practice over the years that's helped to improve. So it's good that you like to communicate. Early on, I didn't want to talk at all.
Right.
Like, let's just be quiet and everything will eventually get better. What I learned is that doesn't work. That anytime that there is a challenge relationally, you got to deal with it, especially if you want and desire for things to improve. And so I believe that, you figure out a way. I try not to use things like 50-50. I think that relationships require 100% effort. And so you may want to talk. And I even share this with couples that you may want to talk. What you'll do is you say, I kind of want to talk something out. Now, I'll probably be like, I don't feel like it. Like, I'm home. I don't feel like talking right now. But I recognize that that's important to you. So as much as I don't want to talk, I do it because it's important to you. Now, because you recognize how I'm wired up and what's valuable to me, you'll let me know ahead of time, hey, I want to talk about this. Let's talk about it. Let's find a good time to do so. That's that balance, that effort that comes when we both see each other and we know what's best for one another. I think that's the case. Is just trying to figure out, like, how do we coexist and how we do so well, but not with the emphasis on how can I change you.
Correct.
Yeah.
So, but would you say early on, maybe that expectation was there from both of us?
Oh, yeah. Well, probably more for me because, I wanted you to kind of, quote unquote, middle finger to the world. Like, well, in part of because I believe in you and I've always seen what you have to bring. We talk about, the what Deja gets from you and what she gets from me. Overwhelmingly, you guys are both extreme hard workers and all that. Deja has confidence, but it's not to the level of mine.
Right.
And so what I tell people is, if I had you guys hard work and diligence, we'd be multimillionaires.
Okay.
Is if you guys had my confidence, we'd be billionaires.
Oh, wow.
Like, just, the way that it is. But because I saw it early on, and I would see, how, either the way that people treated you or whatever, that it would get under your skin. And I would just, I'd be so angry. And I'm like, I just wish you would just feel it like me. And we would fall out and have disagreements because I just wanted you to deal with the world the way that I did. So, a lot of it, early on was that.
No, and I wanted you to explain that in more detail, because even for me, I had to adjust to his personality type, because early on, he could be very sarcastic. And so for me, sometimes people use humor or sarcasm to make a point, or to say what they really want to say in a more subtle or indirect way. And believe it or not, I want to say things more directly. Like, I want to speak from the heart and express how I genuinely feel without using some other like humor or sarcasm to get my point across. So that was one area that we both had to adjust in. And I definitely say that you made improvement in leaps and bounds in that area. But then also, just like you said, me waiting to not just rush you if I wanted to talk about something, and maybe asking first, like, what space are you in? Do you have time? And I think that's helped us over the years. But the point that I'm making, you all, is you really have to communicate. In any relationship, people are not mind readers. I don't care what superpower you have, and I believe you have some. You don't necessarily have the ability to read someone's mind. And so don't think someone just knows how you feel. They know what you want. No, we have to talk those things out. And so with that being said, I want you to talk about your happy place. But as you do that, I'm going to step away from the camera and let our dog out. But tell us a little more about your happy place.
All right. Well, my happy place is really pretty simple. I wish that it would be, no, I don't know, because I enjoy it. My happy place is our home. It is spending time with my wife, spending time with our kids, just being here. I know I listen to people talk about their happy place, and it is oftentimes going away from what you spend so much time building, which to me seems nonsensical. We work hard to build a life, and then you say, I'm happiest when I'm away from what I built. Like, that just doesn't make sense to me. And so because of the effort, the time, the energy that we put into building, I enjoy what we built. We've built a good life. So it is my happy space. It's my happy place. Every day when I exit the doors, I know people who, when they get off work, they take the long way home. Sit out in the driveway or whatever.
Now, to clarify, because recently I did hear a guest and she talked about her happy places in her car, but I'm pointing this out for a reason, is because she understands how she's wired up. A lot of times part of her me time is she sits in her car where she can just be. Because when she's with her family, especially her spouse, she wants to be fully present. And so that's kind of her me time.
Well, and so within that, what I'm not saying is that, hers was specific. I'm talking about the people who run from home.
Gotcha. So I just want to clarify.
The
absolutely.
People who run from home. So within that, home is my sanctuary. It's my happy place. Like, I look forward to it every day. I look forward to spending time with you, with the family. Like, I can't think of nothing else better to do.
I love it. And one thing, because me, I will over-explain or clarify, because there's always room for interpretation. We can never fully articulate ourselves and get out what we're trying to say, but I try to cover everything so I don't have to come back later and then explain something. But, home is my happy place as well. And one of the things I wanted to add to what you were saying is, for us, we even have spaces within the house that are sacred to us.
Oh, absolutely.
And so although we come together and spend time together as a family within our home, it's also kind of a refuge, if you will, that we get that me time in. And we give each other space also.
My office with my books and just tinkering around. That's just a wonderful space for me. If I could, get some reading in, some time to reflect and to think through the issues of the world. Like, it's great.
And then we come together and normally we watch us a movie, eat some popcorn until we fall asleep or whatever we choose for that day. So I don't know, do you think we kind of touched on everything that we wanted to talk about around personality?
Yeah, I think we did. I think we did. We talked with what it looks like, being awkward me.
We all feel awkward in this house.
As well as what it looks like relationally for us. And what I'll add to, you mentioned it, we on probably the most shallowest of things, we disagree oftentimes in the approach to it.
Absolutely.
And so everything can be a bit of a debate, almost a borderline argument. But it ain't no big deal. Like
Never.
we don't really trip about it. Like we disagree on a whole lot every day, all the time. But it's not a big deal. I think it's just, again, communicating is key, and learning. But on the things that are most valuable to us, well, that's where agreement is.
Yep.
And so we place our emphasis there. But it could be something as simple as food for the day, and it could be, a borderline argument on food. And but it's just not allowing those things to be prominent and primary, because we are so different, wired up so different. That means that everything can eventually kind of come to a head. Like, you can disagree and view everything, no matter what it is. But we've learned not to make those things an issue, because what's most important is us, our marriage, our family. And so that's the biggest thing.
No, I'm glad you said that, because it's so true. Like you said, the stuff, and when he uses the word argument, like not serious, it doesn't go there.
No.
But the reason why I'm happy you said it is because this is a safe space for me. So in the world, a lot of times, even in friend groups, I feel like a lot of times I have to adapt and kind of go along to get along sometimes. But in this space, in my home, with you and all my kids, I very much feel comfortable being able to speak my truth, give my opinion, share ideas. And you're right, we're probably going to disagree because we all think very differently. We don't have group think. So on any given day, we will state our opinion or what we believe to be true. Someone will argue that. And at some point, we'll just disagree.
Yep.
But it's safe that I can do that here. So that's why one of the many reasons I love you. I appreciate you. I thank you, for coming on the podcast. And as I close out the pillar of personality, and again, because we have Jamel as our guest today, one of the things I want to say is that he is not impersonal. That's the impression. Like, even when I'm looking at him right now, he's kind of expressionless. Like, I'm very expressive. I speak with my hands. In some ways, I feel demonstrative. He's listening. He cares. He's concerned. But if you ever have to interact with Jamel, you may not always get that from his facial expressions or really by what he's saying, but does he show up for you?
I am oftentimes when you're speaking to me, I am listening and I'm looking into you. I think that's a way of looking at it. And I used to want to be different from that, but your James Baldwin quote at the beginning of the chapter, I just love. And you see, be the you that you choose to be and force the world to deal with it.
You got to deal with it.
And I just learned that whenever I try to make those type of adaptations to my personality, number one, it doesn't work for me because I'm not being my authentic self.
No.
And number two, it gets even more awkward. And number three, it's not me.
That's right. And be yourself. And that's what the book, the podcast is, to share your story. I shared my story in the book. I share a little bit here on the podcast, but it's really to encourage you to just be your authentic self. That's when we're going to get the best of you. And so, do you have any more closing remarks before we wrap up?
No, just make sure that you guys go out and buy the book at Amazon and all your online retailers. You can buy it also here locally if you're in Louisville at the Roots 101 Museum downtown in the Central Business District. You can purchase it there. download it digitally. And also, if you need any types of coaching, my wife is a wonderful leadership consultant, no matter the size of your organization. She's very skilled. So go ahead and book her. Go to RochelleArmstrong.com and get yourself plugged in, and make sure you purchase the book and do the work in there, because it'll make you better by doing so.
Oh, thank you, Boo, for giving me a shout out. Thank you so much. Well, listeners, this is the last episode for season 2. So I just want to wish you and your family a Merry Christmas, a Happy New Year, and Jamel, keep leading out of authenticity.
Will do.
Thank you for tuning in to Pillar Talk with Rochelle. Authentic people, real stories. Rochelle Armstrong, leading authentically.